Hey guys, this is Mr. V over here doing a book review today for One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich by Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. I'm sure I'm butchering the name, but you guys can see it in the title of the video. Anyway, I'm doing a book review for that today. Before I get into my book review, you guys should know that I try to give a spoiler-free book review. So if you see me looking down sometimes, I just have notes. So I try to give a spoiler-free book review. Anyway, the book, One Day in the Life, is a fictional story that basically, it's a pretty short book. It's about 200 pages. And it follows the guy Ivan and his experiences in a Soviet forced labor camp that was in the 1940s and 1950s. Now, while this is a fictional story, it could definitely be based on true events because the author of the book, he was in one of these forced labor camps. So it could definitely be based on it because it actually felt nonfiction at times. And if you guys want to read this book, before you go into the book, I would recommend that you guys know about gulags, or at least a little bit about gulags, because I know just a little bit, but I still know some because he doesn't really go too much in depth about it. So just make sure you know it so you're not confused. And I would also say this book is not really for the lighthearted. Well, it's not super brutal. Definitely the situations they go through at times can be a little tough. So just be aware of that before you even think about going into this book. So the book, as I said, it's just basically, you see one day in the life of this guy, Ivan, in the gulag and like what happens. And the author, he talks about what the shelter's like, the food, the labor, the punishments, the other forced prisoners, or also the officers. And he goes through all of that in the book. And, you know, it gives you some great insight to what it was like. And, you know, because you see what happens or what could have happened. And sometimes if there's going to be a punishment, they show what happens, but they still say it could have been a different punishment or, you know, things like that. So you definitely see what that is like. And that is definitely very interesting. But it definitely is tough to follow at times because the author didn't go into many details about like what the places look like, as he would talk about it and he would give you a brief thing of it, but he could not really go in detail too much about what the places are like because just like life in a gulag, things just kept moving along very quickly. So that's why he couldn't go too much in detail with that. And in that same regard, that also means that he couldn't develop the characters much because, again, this is a pretty short book. You could almost say it's a novella. It was, I don't remember the exact length, but it was about 200 pages. So it was fairly short given the amount of material he is covering. And that's why, you know, he could not develop the characters or scenes much, but the author still did a great job with the very few words that he showed in the book. So, you know, I thought that was really good. But another tough part with this book, I have to say, is that it was an odd book in terms of like a fictional book. I mean, because to me, it reminded me more like of a snapshot of what life was like in the gulag. As there weren't many different story arcs or much suspense. It was more, again, like just a snapshot of this is what it was like because he basically just explained what happened. And that's why a lot of times it felt like just a nonfiction book. Again, I need to reiterate, he claims this is a fictional book, but it really feels just like a nonfiction book because he says, this is what happened, and that's it. Like there aren't many story arcs, character development, things like that. So, you know, be aware of that because you just want to know that before going in. It was still nice, and I still thought he did a good job with a few words that he did, but you definitely want to be aware of that because you do see how difficult life was in a gulag. You definitely get that feeling, and you can see how difficult life is and what people do in those types of situations when they're not getting much food or they're forced to do some of these labor things. And you see how people get by and what they do and some of the good and the bad that people do. So, you know, it's just, it's definitely a very interesting insight to it. And it also, when you're reading the book, it makes you appreciate what you have. It really does. But, you know, I mean, because it was such a short book, there's not much else I can say about the book. So let me give it my official rating right now. So I always rate my books on a scale of 0 to 10. A 0 is an awful book that you should basically never read. A 5 is an average, and a 10 is phenomenal, to the type where if it gets anywhere near a 10, you should definitely put that on your reading list, because I'm a very tough critic. And also a 5's average. So, this book, One Day in the Life of Ivan, I would rate this book a 5. Maybe slightly higher, but I would rate it a 5. And the reason, again, that's an average rating, but the reason I rated it just as an average rating is that while it was very fun to, very interesting, I should say, not fun, it was very interesting to read about what the day in the life was, like one day was like in those gulags. As I stated in the review, there weren't many story arcs, there wasn't character development, there was actually a decent amount of characters for it being such a short book, to where, it just was more like, hey, this is what it's like. And again, it really just felt like a nonfiction book, to where that's why I'm just rating it an average book, that if you want to know more about gulags or what the life was like then I think you guys would enjoy this book. But other than that, it's a little tough. Online reviews are mixed, but that's my rating, is I just rate this an average book. So if you guys have any questions, or if you have disagreements about it, please post that in the comment section below. Hope you guys click the subscribe button, as I do many different book reviews. Anyway, thank you for watching my book review today. This is Mr. V. I hope you guys go and enjoy reading.